Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this very unique, up-close and personal interactive session. Our icon today is a man behind some of the most unique and, well, what can I say, powerful initiatives that have gone on to become the foundations of New Dubai. He's a loving father, loving husband, a golfer, a mentor, an entrepreneur, a serial entrepreneur. He's behind the initiatives like Dubai Shopping Festival, Dubai Summer Surprises, the group CEO and chairman of Batespan BPG Group. Please help me in welcoming on stage with a thunderous round of applause, a man who will go down in history as one of the heroes of Dubai, Mr. Bhojani. I'd also like to call on stage Mr. Suo Sarkar, General Manager, Retail Banking and Wealth Management of Emirates NBD. And I'd like to call the man behind this successful event, the CEO of SPI Group, Shantanu Phansalkar.
First of all, I'd like to welcome all of you to another edition of our very, very successful series, the Global Business Series. This has been one of our very successful initiatives connecting with our business banking customers and the business community at large. And I'm particularly pleased today that Bhojani is here to talk to us up close and personal. I normally leave the introduction to our moderator and MC, but given that Avi is a friend for over 20 years, I couldn't resist introducing him to the audience here. He's not just an ace communicator, advertiser, marketer, educator, and serial entrepreneur. Yeah. He is changed Dubai in many, many ways. And it's our pleasure and privilege to host Avi today. And I'm sure he will not just give the politically correct answers, but also some edgy ones that he does privately. So I'm sure it will be an interesting session this evening. Please ask all the difficult questions that you wanted to ask him. He's changed a number of industries here in Dubai. So it'd be good to ask him all the difficult questions. So Avi, welcome to the session, and I hope you give you a really tough time.
Thank you. I should be giving this to you. That's good.
Yeah. So let's start from the beginning.
Yeah.
Your first venture.
My first entrepreneurial venture.
First entrepreneurial venture, 1985.
That's right.
First week of April. What happened?
Well, I think it was the 8th or 9th of April. Rahul, you may remember that. We were in New Delhi in a company called Ulka, which is now FCB, or still called Ulka FCB. And I did a white paper because there was an advent of second agencies that was coming up. So there's JWT, which re-energized contract. There was a breakout from Clarion, and Tara Sinha was setting up an agency which is now called McCann Erickson. And there was a breakout from Rediffusion, an agency which didn't quite happen, which is called Milestones. But at that point in time, looked very, very good. So here's what had happened for Ulka. From nowhere, in about 2.5 years' time, Ulka had become almost the #1 agency, knocking on Thomson. So as I was doing the white paper, I said, certainly we are going to be the target for all these startups because we've had the clients for the least amount of time, and clients tend to post the honeymoon of the first 6 months. The 6 months to 18 months is when clients tend to switch. If they do, if they go beyond 18, they tend to stay. So I wrote a white paper, and my chairman was in town then. His name is Bal Munkar. And he said, "Son, sounds like a good idea. So how would you like to set up a second company?" And I said, "Uncle, I wasn't talking about it. I was just doing a situation analysis and for you to figure out." He says, "No, I want you to set up this second company." Poonam, my wife then, was in Brussels. So I said, give me till the 17th of April, let her come back, and then we talk about it. So we decided on the 17th of April that we'll set up a company. Between the 9th and the 17th of April, we figured out the name. We said it's going to be called Interface. And we got started, and Bal said, here are a couple of conditions. You can take any account that you're developing but which is not signed on Ulka, by Ulka. You can start with that. And son, you have to be an investor and you'll get shares in the company. And I said, sure. So we started the company.
So you had to buy shares?
I had to I had to pay for my shares. First startup, I was thrilled at the thought of doing a startup. I was 20-something, and pretty young for doing a startup in the Indian context. And he said, you can pick your clients and you can pick people. So Rahul and Nitin were two people who decided to sort of hang their fates. I think they're regretting the day, but that's a different issue. But, and so we started the first business. There was one client called Indian Sugar Mills Association, and that we were just developing at that stage. So I went to the chairman and I said, will you come with us? And he said, yeah, I don't have an issue. But he said, as long as you launch the campaign on the 1st of May. So in other words, in 12 days, you have to set up the company. It almost reminded me later of Internet City, which happened in 14 days. That's a different story. But, so sure, I said, Pradeep Narang was his name. I said, Pradeep, I don't really have cash right now to incorporate the company at this stage. And he said, I'm going to spend ₹1 million. And I'll pay you in any case in end May. The monsoon session of the parliament, it was a public advocacy bid. The monsoon session of the parliament was going to start on the 28th of May, so I want the campaign done by then. So I'm going to pay you by end May, so here's an advance check of ₹1 million. So a company capitalized at 100,000 rupees, got 10x as advance from a client, and that's how we got started.
Wow.
And we lucked out, and things worked a few.
So this client gave you an advance?
Yeah, he gave an advance.
But there was something else that had happened that made you go after this client to get an advance?
What had happened was, Bal said, you're doing a second agency to Ulka. I've got to be picky about the kind of office space. So he helped me choose the office space, and that space was, by the time I paid the advance, it was 98,000 rupees. And Bal also gave me an appointment letter as chief executive, and one of the clauses was that you have a chauffeur-driven car, air-conditioned, which was a big deal in 85 in India, before Maruti hit. So before consumerism happened.
So ambassador?
It was Fiat or Ambassador, Premier Padmini was the trendier one. I was graduating from a Standard Herald, which a lot of people here remember having pushed that car because it wouldn't start on many days, but that's it. So I said, Bal, I've got 2,000 rupees left in the bank. I've got to start the company, and you're saying air-conditioned, chauffeur-driven car. How do I get it from? He said, that's why you're called chief executive. Sort it out. So that was our first lesson, that as an entrepreneur, when you get started, there's nobody else who's going to give you the cash. You've got to try and figure out how to go about it. You've got to wing it. Indian term jugaad helps sometimes, but you've got to think a little out of the box, and you've got to go.
So you became an entrepreneur at that point. How would you define an entrepreneur or a serial entrepreneur? What?
I guess an entrepreneur is a person who decides to put his own fate on his idea or on his or her abilities. They're classical definitions, and this is a little different. That as an entrepreneur, you decide that, yes, I have enough confidence to put money on myself. And that's what an entrepreneur. A serial entrepreneur does it a few times, but then does it a little differently also, starts putting bets on some others to execute then. A serial entrepreneur, in a way, is, if I may say, I'd like to think that I'm closer to a serial entrepreneur, that you take smart bets on smarter people than you.
What could be the possible drivers for someone to become an entrepreneur?
The number of drivers, in a lot of cases, it's just being at the right place at the right time. In a lot of cases, it's a function of, I don't need this shit anymore. I'll give you the example, Bal Munkar. Bal set up Ulka in the 60s because he was a board director in a British advertising agency there in Mumbai called S.H. Benson's, which today is Ogilvy. And Bal was frustrated about the fact that as a non-Anglo-Saxon board member, he had to sign on the attendance register, and his other colleagues did not have to.
Right.
So Bal started a company saying, I'm going to prove it to the world that I don't need this shit. There are other drivers as well. Sometimes some people feel that in the corporate race, somebody else got a promotion and you say, the glass ceiling, I've hit the glass ceiling and might as well do something else. Sometimes it could just be that you're so convinced about the idea. In the context of this region, sometimes it's also that the government is ready to fund you quite a bit.
Sure.
So, it's the Khalifa funds and the SME funds. And that's a good enough driver to say that let me enjoy being an entrepreneur for a few years. And sometimes you're just there at the right time. And, sometimes it just happens. In my case, it just happened. It wasn't as if I was thinking about it or I was driven to it. It wasn't as if I'd hit a glass ceiling. It just happened.
You hadn't planned it. Acha sir. So let me just come back to your career. Your first day in Dubai. You've just arrived. Talk us through your first job here. What happened? How did that go?
Quite interesting. I still remember the date. It was 23rd of August, 1988. I left Interface on the 22nd night. Obviously, there was a farewell party. So some of these guys came to see me off at the airport. I took one of those red-eye flights. And I reached here at 6 in the morning. I hadn't slept a wink. I go to my first job, Gulf News. I was there to head up strategy. And I go into office, and by 4 in the afternoon, word had spread that Gulf News has hired an alcoholic. But my eyes were bloodshot red. So I get whisked into the managing director's office, His Excellency Obaid Umaid Al-Tahir. And the first question he asked me is, so Bhojani, do you have an alcohol problem? I said, what makes you say that? He said, I've been told that. And your eyes are red. I said, my eyes are red because I stopped working at a place last night. And I took an overnight flight, and here I am. But it was a bit of I realized that cultures are a little different.
But why did you come to Dubai?
Why did I come to Dubai? Well, my wife Poonam at that point in time was in California. She's a technology consultant. And I was in Delhi, and she said simply she didn't want to come back to Delhi. So we thought Dubai would be a reasonably interesting place. And I had a former client who became the general manager of Gulf News, and he said, why don't you come and help me with strategy? So that's how it happened.
So then what happened after Gulf News then?
After Gulf, 2.5 years I was there, and a lot of my good friends are still at Gulf News, Rajiv Khanna being one of them. Dilip, the entire team that I was fortunate to have, they all stayed. I was a silly guy who decided that, I wanted to have a little more fun. I helped a few Omani businesses set up an advertising agency in Q1 of 91, yeah. And that happened circumstantially. There was a person in a group called Omar Zawawi Establishment who was tasked with the mandates. He said, and he met me somewhere at a conference, and he said, will you help me build a business plan? I said, as long as you don't expect me to execute the business plan, I'm happy to. So then he said, will you help me find a general manager? And we found a general manager for him, who was a very, very good quality manager out of India. He was working in Lentas, but he was a God-fearing and risk-averse Tamilian. 17th of January 1991, when Iraq decided to invade Kuwait, he was supposed to join on the 26th of January 91. He obviously didn't take the flight, and he said, he didn't realize the geography, but he didn't take the flight. So this Mr. Bajpayee came to me and he said, I'm stuck now. We've got a company. We've got 5 employees. We don't have a general manager. So will you join? And I said, that wasn't part of the deal. But anyways, I enjoyed being at the other side. I felt that I had done what I had to do with the Gulf News. So I decided to move on and set up an agency called ADINC, Advertising International in Oman.
Okay.
The principal shareholder of ADINC was, still is His Excellency Dr. Omar Zawawi. I haven't met a more amazing man in my life than him.
Why so? I mean, why do you call him so amazing?
This man was way ahead of his time in terms of the way he did. He was literally a sheikh. A few stories about him that you hear. One day in 91, I hear that His Excellency has gifted a 707 aircraft to His Majesty, the King of, the Sultan of Oman. The other story you hear is two things. One is that he happens to be the dealer on Boeings for the Middle East. And the more interesting story was he actually wanted a plane for himself, but 707 was fuel inefficient. So if it flew on the royal flag, the fuel bill is paid for by the government. So you can't find too many smarter people than that. He was an amazing man. In the first couple of days, he took a liking to me. And I would keep talking about, Your Excellency, Dubai this, Dubai that. After 2 days, he takes me aside. He says, young man, in certain circles of the Sultanate of Oman, the very mention of Dubai is considered as an insult. Keep this in mind. We are the cultured guys. These are the pirates. So that's Oman. I survived in Oman for 9 months. And I moved back to Dubai. Joined a friend at that point in time called Abdullah Mahid Al Gorer to help rebuild his company called PanGulf.
So that's when BPG started, or PanGulf started.
PanGulf had started actually 10 years before that. PanGulf's story is, again, quite interesting. Abdullah's late father, it connects back to India in an interesting manner. Abdullah's late father had set up 2 banks. One, which is called Mashrak today, and the second, which is part of the Emirates Bank. It was called Emirates National Bank. Emirates National Bank went bust. But before Emirates National Bank hired a general manager from Union Trust in India. Abdullah's late father thought that the time had come to set up an advertising business. So he told the general manager to get somebody from India. And their agency was an agency which was called then Sisters, which was run by Bobby's sister, and which is now called Saatchi & Saatchi India. And Bobby sent his nephew, a guy called Ravi Rao, to set up and run PanGulf. So and on a management contract. A few years in, Ravi became full-time, and in 91, he and Abdullah had a difference. So he went and set up a second company, which is now part of DDB here.